Good morning, Your Excellencies. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us on this sultry day in New York City. My name is Rachel Kite. I am the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Sustainable Energy for All and the CEO for Sustainable Energy for All, and I'm delighted to be here with many partner organisations and countries, colleagues from the private sector. Thank you all for coming for this launch of what I believe is an important report, an important first. This work, Cooling for All, and we're grateful to those who've supported this work, in particular the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Programme, KSEP, and their representatives are here and they'll be speaking later on. I think this is a first attempt to really put our arms around, to mark out the contours of what is a significant and I think, explored issue of access to cooling. This is, in diplomatic language, this is where the Paris Agreement, the Kigali Amendment, and the SDGs meet. But it's what we've tried to do is look at that intersection from a human perspective. What does it mean to people? Sometimes the language that we negotiate seems a long way away from what it means to know that that vaccine for your child is safe, to know that those vegetables on the plate are safe, to know that you will be able to be successful and productive in your job because there will be cooling in the building, and to know that you will not be at risk from infirmity or even from death when the next heat spike comes. So we, I think, are at great pains in the publicity around this report to explain that cooling is not a luxury. I've been really struck since we took on this work and since I started being educated by many of you about the centrality of thinking thermally, at the sort of reflex within the development community in particular, that this is just about getting everybody an air conditioner. It's not. But honestly, sometimes I wonder, well, what's so bad about that if that air conditioner can be ultra efficient and can be HFC free? The kinds of experienced heat waves, the heat trap effect in our growing cities and towns, and the kind of summer that we're having in the northern hemisphere and the kind of spikes we're seeing in the southern hemisphere would mean that this is not something for the future, right? This is something today. We're experiencing this today. And if you don't have access to electricity, if you don't have access to a safe place to go to get cool, a lot is at jeopardy, not only your life and the well-being of yourself and your family, but also your economic productivity and the economic development of the country overall. We have a number of people who are going to speak in two panels, and without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ian Crosby, who is the head of energy efficiency and cooling in the global team of Sustainable Energy for All, and he's going to walk you very quickly through the key findings of this report. Ian, thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you again, everyone that's braved the heat this morning and the security controls to join us today. It's great to have such a full room. So as Rachel mentioned, we're very pleased and proud to launch this report that's been prepared by Sustainable Energy for All in conjunction with our partners from the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Programme. And if you see me nodding strangely, it's because I've got Ben Hartley at the back who's actually operating the slides for me, so please don't get too worried if I smile in your direction. So the report really contains compelling data that uncovers the unprecedented risks for millions of people who cannot access cooling today, and we focus really on three key areas: on buildings, food cold chains, and medical cold chains. As we're sitting here in a nice air-conditioned room after coming in from the New York summer, I want you to imagine the lives of hundreds of millions of children and adults across an increasingly warming world where a lack of access to cooling poses severe risks to their health and to their safety. In India, nearly 20% of temperature-sensitive healthcare products, including a quarter of vaccines, arrive damaged or degraded because of broken or insufficient cold chains that fail to keep them safe and cool. When every year 1.5 million children under the age of 5 die from vaccine-preventable diseases, cooling can make all the difference. In a world facing rising temperatures, access to cooling is not a luxury, it is a human right. It's vital to keeping our children healthy, our vaccines stable, and our economies productive. It represents a fundamental issue of equity that underpins the ability of millions to escape poverty and to realize the Sustainable Development Goals. Simply put, sustainable cooling lies at the core of a functioning, inclusive, clean economy. Cooling, as Rachel mentioned, lies at the intersect of 3 historic international agreements reached in the last years: the Paris Climate Agreement, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and the Montreal Protocol's Kigali Amendment. The Paris Agreement to curb global warming and the Kigali Amendment to reduce HFCs have brought attention to the close linkages between cooling, energy demand, and climate change. But together with the SDGs, these 3 landmark agreements focus the mind on a new challenge. How do we meet everyone's cooling needs efficiently, affordably, sustainably, and reliably? And that was the question, really, that KSET posed us probably around 9 months ago. Based on our broader analysis of 52 vulnerable countries in hot climates, the report shows that more than 1.1 billion people face significant cooling access risks based on impacts to their health and productivity. This includes 470 million people in poor rural areas without access to electricity. Globally, 1/3 of the total food produced is lost or wasted every year, 1.3 billion tons of it. 90% of food waste in developing countries occurs in the supply chain. 600 million people, nearly 1/10 of the world's population, get food poisoning every year. 420,000 of them die, including 125,000 children under the age of 5. The World Health Organization estimates that nearly 50% of freeze-dried and 25% of liquid vaccines are wasted each year, with cold chain disruptions being one of the biggest reasons. The lack of vaccines means higher illness rates that place an increased burden on a country's economy. Consider a rural subsistence farmer in Nigeria who lives in extreme poverty and lacks access to electricity. If she were able to pre-cool her crops, it could double the amount she earns by selling fresh-looking vegetables rather than poor, limp ones. If she were able to keep the fish she buys from a market cool, it might avoid her children getting food poisoning. For her, an off-grid solar home system could power a fan, could keep food fresh in an affordable fridge. An intact cold chain could raise her income, allow her to send her kids to school and to get them safe vaccines. Our analysis estimates that 630 million people living in sweltering urban slums with little or no electricity services to protect them against extreme heat waves. So consider someone living in a slum in Bangladesh. She may have electricity, but access is intermittent, meaning she can't rely on the fan that the family could barely afford to buy in the first place. Her children don't have the energy to learn properly, such as the oppressive heat in the room. Heat waves already kill an estimated 12,000 people annually around the world. Unchecked, that will rise to 255,000 by 2050. Those at greatest risk are the elderly, the young, those who work outside, already society's most vulnerable groups. So in slums, we really need to think about simple solutions like cool roofs, walls, highly efficient fans, and financing instruments that can get those cooling devices more in people's reach. Cities need to develop heat action plans to protect the most vulnerable populations. With work hour losses due to excessive heat growing, and mainly growing in South Asia and West Africa, the cost to economies and people is expected to be billions of dollars by 2050. The report identifies another significant population group, the 2.3 billion people in the emerging middle class of developing countries that may be on the verge of buying their first air conditioner. But the impact of carbon emissions of these people buying the most affordable but perhaps the least efficient appliance is immense. We need to increase the minimum energy performance standards and finance mechanisms that allow people to buy the most efficient devices, not the least efficient. By focusing on the real risks that people face, we have identified 9 priority countries with the largest populations that face significant cooling-related risks, and where action is most needed to help deliver cooling for all. The 9 are India, China, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Indonesia, Nigeria, Mozambique, Sudan, and Brazil. And 2 of these countries, India and Nigeria, have both sizable rural and urban populations at risk. So how do we go about providing sustainable cooling for all? An important place to begin is by defining the targets that these critical 9 countries need, who are facing the biggest risks. This means that we have to get much more granular and precise data about the numbers of people and where they're actually living. We need to develop strategies and action plans to develop and test new initiatives to demonstrate effective approaches. Due to their swelling populations and the urban heat island effect, cities require special attention. There are immediate and simple solutions available to reduce heat buildup in cities through measures such as whitewashing roofs, using solar power to drive fans to make people more comfortable in densely packed slums. And these are measures, among others, that are being promoted by the Global Cool Cities Alliance. As roofs and pavements typically cover about 60% of city surfaces, the use of reflective materials can substantially reduce urban heat island effects, cutting urban temperatures by up to 4 degrees Celsius. There's also a critical need to accelerate the development and the adoption of minimum energy performance standards for appliances and implement better building codes to reduce the heat island effect. We need to design the cities of the future to use solutions such as district cooling. Uninterrupted cold chains are vital to reducing food loss and waste. Solutions need to be found in cold chains that harness innovations in energy-saving refrigeration to transport a farmer's products safely from farm to fork, or to deliver a family's vaccines to the village clinic. There are a number of emerging technologies and entrepreneurs coming up with innovative solutions, but we need to know how to commercialize them, either by improving the design, producing them at scale, developing business models to make the solutions affordable. Setting up a network of business angels that provide expertise and support to entrepreneurs and startups could accelerate the development and deployment of some of these new technologies. Prizes such as the Ashton Awards can also help recognize leaders in sustainable technology and business models and raise awareness of their achievements. Industry cooperation has already been a major factor in the success of the Montreal Protocol, supporting the development of new technologies and the rapid transfer of technologies to developing countries. Now these industries need to come together as a matter of priority to provide low GWP technology and business models that address the needs at the base of the pyramid. Stronger participation from the financial community is also required, and there must be active engagement to develop products and financial solutions for those customers that need it most. We need to bring policymakers up to date and train people to work in this area. Much of this work can be incorporated in existing programs or new initiatives at the design phase. This also provides an opportunity for governments to work together with the cooling industry by helping create, for example, dedicated centers of research and development of innovative approaches to cooling. We need to train people to work on the servicing and the maintenance of cooling devices. We believe we've shown that cooling is an important development issue, but we need to raise awareness much more broadly and integrate cooling into the development debate. A response to this might be to create a cooling secretariat with a mandate to focus responses to this issue, coordinate cooperation among public agencies, business, civil society organizations, work with industry, donors, and international organizations to co-design pilot solutions, support technical assistance to governments, and to track and report on progress. Without access to sustainable cooling, a substantial share of the world's population will remain exposed to life-threatening temperatures, while levels of food loss will remain high. Medicines and vaccines will continue to spoil in the supply chain. To government, our message is that there are huge economic and social benefits to be gained by improving access to cooling, reducing the number of lost work hours, improving the productivity of the workforce, avoiding costs of healthcare for people with food poisoning who are suffering because their vaccines weren't stored properly, increasing the incomes of farmers, creating new jobs to service a new cool economy. Our message to industry is this. The cooling industry has already shown its ability to innovate in response to the Montreal Protocol and is stepping up its responses to the Kigali Amendment. So far, the industry hasn't yet focused really on the base of the pyramid, but our challenge is for you to discover cold gold for the 1.1 billion people most at risk. Let me be clear, as Rachel mentioned, cooling for all does not mean putting an air conditioner in every home. It does mean thinking about the services people require and how to provide them in the most efficient, affordable, and climate-friendly way. It means thinking short-term about deploying current efficient technologies. It also means thinking long-term about the performance standards of the future, developing the cities of the future. It means thinking about the nexus of energy efficiency and renewable energy, be it off-grid or grid-connected. This report provides a reference point, but urgent accelerated action is needed to clarify needs, identify priority areas and populations, engage government and private sector partners, propose and test solutions, including business models. And we look forward to working with all of you on this critical issue. Thank you.
Ian, thank you very much indeed. I commend the report to you and hope that you will read it. There's, I think, a richness in the sort of risk-based approach. So one of the things that not just the 9 countries that have been identified as high risk and the 52 that we looked at in detail, but for every country, for every city, really mapping who's at greatest risk and then coming up with strategies to meet their needs, I think seems an obvious first step from the public sector side. It's very interesting that in most, if not all, NDCs, there's almost no mention of cooling, despite obvious implications for energy demand, energy systems, and therefore what that does for commitments under the Paris Agreement. There are some references to cooling efficiency through minimum energy standards for appliances, but it isn't really tackled head on. So it seems to me that as we focus on 2020 and ratcheting up ambition, here's one area that's underexplored in NDCs, which might actually produce some important gains. There are countries who have focused on cooling, and obviously India has made considerable progress on a national cooling action plan, and KSEP and others are working with a number of other countries to begin moving cooling action plans forward. Of course, one of the leaders of the pack is Rwanda, who gave their name to the Kigali Amendment, and Minister Baruta announced a plan to develop a national cooling strategy earlier this year. Let me introduce our first panel, and having mentioned Rwanda, on my left, please, we're delighted to be able to welcome Her Excellency Ambassador Valentine Rugwabiza from the Permanent Mission of Rwanda to the United Nations. We're also joined by Deborah Barker-Manasseh, Permanent Mission of the Marshall Islands to the United Nations. Rwanda and Marshall Islands have really played a leadership role in the global panel that stewarded this work that we present to you today. We're also joined by Charlotte Perra, who is the president of Climate Works, who house the KSEP initiative. On my right, I'm delighted to be able to welcome John Gallion, who's the president of Danfoss North America, Danfoss being one of the private sector partners that have dedicated enormous amounts of time and energy to this work. I'm also delighted to be able to welcome Christine Egan, the CEO of CLASP, and Marcel Allers, who is our colleague from UNDP, the head of energy there. So we're going to whiz through this issue because we can come at it from so many different angles. But if I could start with you first, Your Excellency, Madam Ambassador, making cooling real for people can be an issue of life or death, and we saw that periodically we see that in heating incidents. So meeting their needs sustainably seems to be a matter which is quite urgent now. What do you see as actionable steps that countries could take to close the access gap?
Thank you very much. Good morning to all. Thank you very much, Rachel, really for having us on this panel. Before I I go directly into some of the recommendations, I would like first of all to really send the greetings of Dr. Vincent Biruta, whom you know very well. You work very closely with him. That is the Rwanda Minister for Environment. He commends personally the excellent work that is being done by Sustainable Energy for All, and in particular the support also for this report that has been provided by Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program. So just wanted to really convey that on behalf of Dr. Vincent Biruta. Now, I think having all just listen to the very informative and I will say eye-opener presentation by Jan, it's very clear that well, the scope of climate change and the absence of cooling in many parts of the world is creating huge problems. And as in many situations, generally, those living in the parts of the world that are less responsible for the different changes are impacted the most, also including by the lack of cooling. This is happening very fast. I would just like to mention something that a news that was shared with all of us this week. Not this week, 10 days ago. The Algerian town of Ouargla recorded the continent's highest temperature ever at 124 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is just to put in perspective what is happening right now in many places on the continent. And they were able to record, I think there are a number of places where they're actually not able to record the temperatures. As with many global environment-related challenges, again, this will require a combination. To address this will require a combination of international and national actions. The risk, I would also like to emphasize the point that you made very clearly. Cooling cannot be considered to be a luxury. Cooling is an essential part of productivity, of efficiency, but also of safety. Of safety, and it goes as far as that, of safety and security. If there is no security for vaccines, there is no safety for vaccines, then we know exactly what will be the implications in a number. If there is no safety for the food that people have to take on a daily basis, then we know exactly what that means. And the absence of cooling cost a lot to the economy. It will be quite interesting to have also that angle, what it costs exactly to not have cooling, beyond the losses that we know in agriculture, beyond the cost that we know in the health sector, but what it costs even in terms of the economic growth to just not have access to efficient cooling. Now let me come to the recommendations. One first recommendation and clear recommendation, I think, could be from our perspective to have as many countries as possible ratifying the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. That is just straightforward because today, as of today, we have 40 countries that have ratified. So more than enough countries, more than the minimum required for the implementation, which is 20. However, having universal ratification sends a very clear message to the industry. It tells the industry that this is an area where to invest, where to innovate. This is an area in terms of energy efficiency. This is where you should be directing your R&D efforts and investment. So ratifying that is a simple measure that is a measure that could send a very clear message. A second recommendation from our standpoint is that policymakers should work quickly to develop and enforce minimum energy performance standards. And again, it was clearly highlighted by the report. It's not about having a trade-off between energy, between climate change, cooling and energy efficiencies. No, it's really about having equipment, appliances that have standards that will really make them not solve a problem without worsening another situation. So it's let me put it as simply as I can. Just again was mentioned by yourself, Rachel. We have developed a national cooling strategy in Rwanda, and we think that that is the way to go. These approaches, well, it's very important to raise the awareness, but where action has to take place, it has to be really at national level. So it's very important to have a national cooling strategy that will focus both on the part that has to do with the building, but of the part that has to do with the food industry as well, and on the part that has to do with the health sector and many other sectors. We have done that, and already we have very clear estimate in our case of what exactly a certain type of appliances, what exactly it will save in terms of on the energy bill of the people in the case of Rwanda. So I think it's very important, and in that case, both yourself, your program, but also the Kigali cooling efficiency program, I think will provide very useful support. It's very important that we all come together. Quite honestly, I would tell you, I've been myself educated in this by just the moment Vincent Biruta asked me, he said, well, look, we have all these commitments here. I can't leave Kigali, so I need you to be there for us and to represent us. And I just told him, I know nothing about cooling. I absolutely know nothing about cooling. I spend most of my time in the peace and security matters. He said, well, you know, we'll send information, but I'm going to send a very informative report that was put together by the KCAP. So just to, bear with me if you think that my points have been too general. I'm still in the process of being educated. Thank you very much.
No, I was in the same boat you were a year ago, so it's. I keep telling everybody that cooling is really cool once you start getting into it. I'm going to pass now to our colleague Deborah Barker-Manasseh from the Permanent Mission of the Marshall Islands. Obviously the Marshall Islands is at the very forefront of the struggle for increased ambition around climate action. Given the particular dynamics of your economy. But what rings true about this report for you? And given that the Kigali Amendment, if it's ratified and implemented, does actually help us work on a climate forcing substance, which presumably if we can show some determined action on that, buys us a little bit more time to figure out how to get rid of carbon out of the economy. It'd be interesting to get your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And firstly, I also wanted to extend our thanks to you, Madam Moderator, Rachel, and the Cooling for All team, along with the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program for your important and thought-provoking work. I myself am not a cooling expert, but after reviewing the report, I think that it really is an area that we do tend to miss out in a lot of our development planning. I also want to recognize my co-panelists here. In looking at the report, I think just two points that I wanted to bring up was that the report very rightly highlights the clear intersection between the SDGs, the Kigali Amendment, and the Paris Agreement at the policy level as well as practical implementation level. It emphasizes the importance of holistic and integrated approaches to addressing poverty and inequality through anticipating the cooling needs of the unserved and underserved globally. It importantly calls our collective attention toward providing these cooling needs in a sustainable, efficient, and affordable way without adding to the burden of global warming, which is of particular importance to low-lying countries and coastal areas threatened by sea level rise. And just to put in our own national context, the Marshall Islands continues to grapple with our own sustainable development aspirations in a world of frequent and extreme weather events, a world in which is warming at unprecedented levels. For us, the ability to capture the value of our fishery industry is key to growing our economy. As one of the few revenue-earning sectors, cooling in this case is clearly not a luxury, but a necessary component at each stage of the entire process of the fishery operations. And I'm glad that the report has touched on cooling and fisheries as well. At the local level, the ability to access and sustainably deploy new, efficient, and appropriate technologies for storage and transportation of fish and agricultural products, some of which are harvested in the very remote areas of the islands, remains challenging and requires technical cooperation, transfer of efficient technology suited for these remote areas. Many times, the extra income that would have been realized from the ability to reach these further markets could be the difference between sending a child to school or not. And similarly, in health services, some of our communities would have access to vaccinations through the availability of systems to transport and store these vaccines at temperatures required. So in getting back to the question posed, Madam Moderator, we feel that the risk posed by a lack of cooling would actually be very crippling to the productivity of many vulnerable countries and populations, like the Marshall Islands. And we would therefore agree that with the point that cooling is not a luxury. It's a human right and a fundamental issue of equity that underpins the ability of millions to realize the SDGs, not just simply SDG 7. And finally, the identification of risks and building these into global frameworks, including support to national development planning and implementation. We feel it's recognized as an essential aspect of building resilience. Findings such as the ones in the Chilling Prospects report being launched today provide some important initial findings and recommendations for us to consider as we collectively work towards meeting our global goals under Agenda 2030, the Paris Agreement, as well as the Kigali Amendment. So I thank you very much, again, for inviting our mission to be a part of this very important launching event.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I want to go straight forward now to Charlotte Perro, who's the president of Climate Works, who host or have been the launching pad for KSEP, without whose partnership that this report wouldn't have been done. We've tried very much not only to identify the risks in this work, but also then the flip side of that is obviously the opportunities. And obviously I think it's very interesting because philanthropy has sort of taken the Kigali Amendment by the scruff of the neck and sort of really been there because it's all about fast action. If we're going to respond to the needs of the Marshall Islands, Rwanda, it's about fast action. So what do you see as the places where philanthropy perhaps can put its finger on the balance going forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you for inviting me here. Good morning. I'm really happy to be here today for the launch of this important new report. For those of you who don't know the ClimateWorks Foundation, we are a philanthropic organization that works globally to advance climate solutions. We do this by making grants, and we also provide a range of services to help the broader philanthropic community come together to tackle climate change. We are also one of 17 foundations that contributed to the $51 million Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program, and as Rachel described, we host the Secretariat. In that capacity, we are really, really delighted to be working in partnership with Sustainable Energy for All and with many of the people in the room in the Cooling for All initiative, and to have helped support this new report. Clearly, affordable cooling options that are energy efficient and that use climate-friendly refrigerants are very good for the climate. They offer enormous benefits from a climate mitigation perspective. So this work fits very, very squarely within our climate mitigation mission. But we are also really excited to be working on solutions that offer not only climate benefits, but that support the Sustainable Development Goals and help people live healthier, better lives. From a philanthropic perspective, it's really inspiring, I think, for many foundations to see the potential for efficient, clean cooling to not only provide huge climate benefits, but also to help ensure we can supply food to meet the needs of a growing population, that we can help raise the incomes of smallholder farmers, we can help vaccines and medicines get to market, reach the people who need them, and can help improve labor productivity and comfort and reduce heat-related deaths in the world's many hotspots, which of course are only getting hotter as climate change really takes hold. I really want to congratulate Sustainable Energy for All on this new report. It's a strong report and provides, I think, much needed and valuable evidence of the importance of cooling for food security and health and productivity and development. It contains clearly some stunning numbers. As Ian mentioned, I was particularly struck by the estimate that more than 1 billion people find their health and livelihoods truly at risk because of lack of access to cooling. I also think it's terrific that the report highlights really important and interesting linkages, like the finding that food waste, which we know is an egregious problem and is often due to lack of refrigeration in the cold chain, that food waste perhaps depresses the incomes of smallholder farmers, 500 million of them around the world, by on average 15%. That is really an important finding in a world where, as we know, many, many smallholder farmers are really struggling to bring themselves and their families out of poverty. That kind of finding, the findings in this report, are a great reminder to those of us in the philanthropic community and to others that all of these issues are interconnected and that the solutions are as well. And to the question about sort of what philanthropy can do, there's the standard philanthropic toolkit of everything from analysis, awareness building, convening, policy design, advocacy that you apply in different ways in different locations around different outcomes. But I think in this case, one of the most important things to highlight is the importance of continuing to build partnerships across philanthropy, civil society, the public sector, the private sector, and among those of us who primarily work on climate change and others who work primarily on other issues, health and development and so forth, so that together we can pursue smart solutions that provide a wide range of benefits. I also want to close with an announcement. Today, the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program is pleased to announce that we will commit $5 million to support the recommendations in this report. My colleague, Dan Hamza-Goodacre, sitting over there, will talk more about that commitment on the next panel. So thank you again, Rachel, Sustainable Energy All, for inviting us here today and for everything that you are doing to make not only sustainable energy, but also sustainable cooling available for everyone. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the continued strategic wisdom of ClimateWorks, and I hope that this report will actually open up avenues for others to be able to play a role. I just want to identify a few people in the room. Dr. Maria Nera, who is the dynamo behind a lot of what WHO does on environmental and other, the relationship between health and economic development and environment, and she's a great partner of mine and of SEforALL, and we're delighted to have you in the room. Ambassador Jan Kinkert, who is our landlord and protector and friend of Sustainable Energy for All, the permanent representative of Austria. Of course, Austria very kindly hosts Sustainable Energy for All. Our headquarters are in Vienna. Thank you, Jan, for being here. And also the Mott Foundation, Sandra Smithy, and Ellen Dorsey from Wallace Global Fund, two strategic partners of SEforALL, without whom we wouldn't be here today. So thank you. I'm sure there's lots of other friends in the room as well I'll get to later. Now I'm going to flip it over just for gender balance to John Gallion from Danfoss. Sorry. Not really. No. So Ian talked about cold gold. So there's enormous potential for bringing forward sort of products and services to cooling at the bottom of the pyramid. I mean, you are an organisation that prides yourself on innovation and on opening up new businesses. So it would be really interesting to get your perspective, as a leading private enterprise working in this space. What's the challenge from your perspective, and what's the opportunity?
Well, thank you, Rachel, for the diversity and inclusion. But also thanks to the members of the Cooling for All panel. I would like to commend you for really working together on this important topic and shedding light on the vital goal of providing sustainable cooling for all. It's a topic that is critically important. I'd like to say I'm one of the self-proclaimed cooling experts because I've been working in this area for more than 30 years in industry. But in a simple way, at Danfoss, we're working hard to keep people, products, and the planet cool. That's what we do. And as the report has shown, we are challenged by extremes and to the most vulnerable people, inefficient cold chains, and really a warming world. It underlines that we need to act today. And the good news really is that we do have proven available solutions to do so. I have 3 points. The first really is we need to keep people comfortable. And those of you who got stuck up a little bit in the lines out there, that's especially important today. But if you watch the local news, there's 10 million people are now under life-threatening heat warnings here in the Northeast. And I would expect that we're probably better prepared than most places in the world. The World Health Organization forecasts that by 2030 there will almost be 92,000 heat-related deaths, and that's expected to rise to 255,000, by 2050. When keeping people comfortable, we need to do it in an efficient way to decrease the energy demand and that figure, and consequently the indirect CO2 emissions. By using the most energy-efficient technology, the IEA estimates by 2050 we can reduce total global CO2 emissions by something in the order of 38%. And let me give you a very simple example. There's an existing hotel in Kifuji in Jua, hopefully I pronounced that right, hotel in China. It's an existing structure. It replaced their cooling system with a high-efficiency, variable speed, oil-free compressor technology that we use, and it was implemented for their air conditioning systems. It not only saved on an annual basis $35,000, but it reduced the CO2 emissions by some 300 tons, or what is equivalent to about 60 cars per year. This is really one example of how we can keep people comfortable in a sustainable way. Similar efficiency technology should be implemented globally across applications and market sectors, thereby allowing us to keep people comfortable in a sustainable way. My second point is we need to keep our products at the proper temperature. Today, 1/3 of all food is lost due to inefficient or non-existent cold chains. If food waste was a country, it would be the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gases. Let me say that again, just so that settles in. If food waste was a country, it would be the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gases. Imagine the amount of CO2 we could save and the number of people that could be fed. The potential is vast. In India, it's estimated that 40% of all perishable food is lost due to inadequate cold chains. Imagine the impact on the economies and the quality of life if we could avoid these food losses. But what can we do about it? We're working with the Confederation of Indian industry, Danfoss has helped banana farmers more than double their productivity, and they were able to sell their crops to Europe for the first time. How did we do this? An entirely new process was created in India called Banana Festival. That implemented best practice and strengthened farmers' education on post-harvest management, and through the collaboration between farmers and a new organization was created along with the Indian government, and they want to replicate this food festival for the rest of India. Arguably, the most critical application or product is vaccines. And vaccines and medicines are highly temperature sensitive. Expanding the cold chain can potentially prevent 2 million vaccine-related deaths each year. And as Ian commented in his opening remarks, the WHO estimates that nearly 50% of the freeze-dried and 25% of the liquid vaccines are wasted each year. By improving sustainable and energy-efficient cold chains, we believe we can reduce the amount of food loss, increase the income for farmers, and safeguard vaccines. The journey from inefficient to efficient is not always easy, no matter how we are talking about cooling products or people, but we can encourage the journey. So in short, how do we do it? Industry has proven that we can meet the technological challenges. We have them today. Now we need to take a holistic approach that includes supportive regulations, incentives, education, and collaboration as we are today to deploy the proven technologies that are available to attain achievable cooling for all. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you folks today.
Thank you, John. And I really want to commend Danfoss because I think you've committed enormous amounts of time and expertise from across the firm, and many of you, together with many other companies in the industry, and we're grateful for all of the wisdom that you've brought to this process. Now to Christine Egan from CLASP. You are living in a time of growing innovation in cooling technology, but as it is with other industries, often the innovation happens in isolation. You perhaps have a better overview than many. How do we connect those entrepreneurs with their leapfrog technologies or with the new innovative approaches? How do we connect that up, and how do we sort of take that to scale? Easy question.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. Just for those of you who do not know, CLASP is an NGO. We are dedicated to promoting energy-efficient and climate-friendly appliances on the grid to prevent catastrophic climate change, and off the grid to end energy poverty. And so the categories that Ian has put forward today, from the rural poor to the climate captive, what my organization does is try to conduct research and run programs to address and improve the energy efficiency in the lives of folks in all of those categories, cooling appliances included. The Chilling Prospects Report obviously highlights the very serious need for sustainable cooling and refrigeration solutions in the developing world. Obviously, that eye-popping 1.1 billion people facing cooling access risks is a number that is really quite amazing and shows us the magnitude of the problem. One of the points that I really want to amplify, I think, sort of melting on our way in here today, we can all feel the need for thermal comfort, and it's not hard to imagine, if you were a tomato or a vaccine, the need for medical safety and preservation of food. I also want to emphasize and really drive home one of the points that we've learned in our programs, and I've really seen going out into the field, is that it's also livelihoods. And very often it's women's livelihoods in particular. And I'm just going to give a couple of examples. We don't think about it, but refrigerators are a business. They're a small business. A refrigerator enables income-generating activities for small retailers, such as the sale of cold drinks or storing milk, food, and other perishable items. And even when I say that, it all sounds very conference roomy. I spent about 2.5 weeks off the grid in Uganda and Kenya, and met with 2 women who I really want to drive home the nature of their lives and what this does in this context. These are last-mile consumers. One businesswoman told me that she has a drink-selling business. She's gone from selling 10 drinks a day to 60 cold drinks a day. However, when you touched her cold drinks, they're lukewarm by US standards because her solar refrigerator is not working quite as well as you would hope. But she won't send that refrigerator back to the supplier to be fixed because she can't live without that income for the 6 weeks to 12 weeks it would take to get that appliance fixed. I met another woman who is a dairy farmer. You may not know this because I didn't grow up around dairy farms, but cows produce milk at multiple times in the day. The evening milk, for example, is perishable because there's no way for them, the sellers come and pick it up in the morning, and so the milk that you get at night is more likely to spoil. It's sold at a discount. One of the women who I met through her solar milk chilling refrigerator was able not only to send her child to school, pay for a better boarding school, but she was able to hire a worker. This is a woman who had serious back problems, and her doctor had told her she had to stop the hard labor on the farm. And so as we think about our large goals and our big numbers, I think it's important and interesting to contextualize this in the lives of real human beings and the productivity of women in particular. I'll return now, however, to some statistics. According to CLASP's research into the appliance market, the annual spending on refrigerators by off and weak-grid households is approximately 75 million. This is just some of the cold coal noted in the report. Cutting-edge design technology is working to make refrigerators viable for a much larger proportion of the global off and weak-grid population. And if efficient, spending could increase to 1.1 billion by 2020. A 38% compound annual growth rate, despite lower cost per units for these things. And although this is true, off-grid refrigerators have a very low market penetration today. Less than 40% in Nigeria, 30% in India, just 6% in Bangladesh, and only 1% in Kenya. Fans are another example. Most of the world actually cools by fans, not by air conditioning. Fans are in high demand. They often are very inefficient. They consume often at least 10 times as much energy as lighting in the same setting. And recent technologies suggest that we could reduce their energy consumption with brushless DC motors by 50%. A survey, for example, to highlight one of the countries you guys have talked about, a survey of energy access professionals found that fans ranked 3rd and 4th among the most demanded appliances in Bangladesh and India, respectively. And improvements in price and efficiency could absolutely unlock further demand. So to get to this question of how do we find these small entrepreneurs or leapfrog technologies, low market penetration of appliances and inefficient appliances is something that CLASP deals with every day, particularly through the work we do in our offices in Nairobi and New Delhi. We recognize that to achieve these goals, we need an on-the-ground understanding of consumer needs and market barriers. This is critical to successful program design. We've already begun this work for the off-grid refrigerator market. We've held, for example, business-to-business matchmaking events where we bring customers, suppliers, distributors into one room to support and more fully understand the distribution channels in these unique environments. This is an incredibly nascent market, and it's hard to overvalue or overstate what face-to-face contact can mean. It's very rare, and it can be highly beneficial to creating sales and for business relationships to grow and these products to go forward. In our work, we have come across literally dozens of entrepreneurs and small business owners who have an understanding of the challenges at hand. These entrepreneurs understand the nuances of the markets they serve, especially in terms of logistics. They know what they need for financing, and we really need a programmatic approach that takes a bottom-up approach for handling these off-grid, poor access environments. This is very, very different and should be emphasized than the top-down approach of a minimum energy performance standard. The refrigerator that can do milk chilling in Bangladesh is not the same refrigerator that businesswoman needs. The off-grid cold chain for maize in Uganda is not the same as the off-grid cold chain for tomatoes in Rwanda. So these are the kinds of things that we're promoting through a variety of awards. And one thing I really want to emphasize is philanthropy is coming together in many different forums. CLASP is the secretariat of something called the Efficiency for Access Coalition, which has cooling as a major theme. And most of the major philanthropies coordinating programs in the space are working together to try to crack this nut. And so with that, I'll close.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So I'm going to turn now to Marcel from UNDP. I think it'd be really interesting to hear from, as an international organisation and leading organisation in the space of sustainable energy, the sort of climate and sustainable development intersection, what are the challenges you see, and what's the role do you think that UNDP could play going forward? Thank you.
I'm pleased to be here to say a few words and to share some of my own experiences and of my organization. The United Nations Development Programme, as the name suggests, we have a development mandate, which is actually really broad. And through a very extensive network of country offices, we're actually present on the ground in many of the developing countries where we help the people with their work. And so I think that's one thing that we can bring to the table is something, how do you translate all these plans, all these priorities into concrete action? Somebody's got to do it, and we have actually been an active actor in this space for a few decades now. It is true we have not approached it typically as cooling, but under different guises, different names, energy efficiency, air conditioning, a lot of through the electricity-based pathways to bring cooling to people. So we have been and are an implementing agency of several of the major climate funds, like the Global Environment Facility, the Green Climate Fund, but also the Montreal Protocol and the Global Fund in the health space. And so we have been channeling funding through countries to help them translating this into action. So one of the advantages that this brings is that we have, I think, a fairly comprehensive overview and holistic view of the different pieces that are available and can be channeled to really affect action and become more effective on the ground. So I think that's definitely where we can help and will have done so and continue to do so. We've already done quite a bit. We worked with Christine's organization for many years. We have done a lot on buildings, on energy efficiency, through codes or to appliance, and the sort of top-down approaches that those are, but also really from bottom-up, from a bottom-up approach. Through the Global Fund and more to health-related, we have been doing the Solar for Health program, electrifying medical facilities in off-grid settings to allow them to have electricity through solar panels for their vaccines. So we have a very strong focus on implementation on the ground. Going forward, we have aligned ourselves very closely with the Sustainable Development Goals and the Development Agenda more broadly. Because we have such a broad mandate, we cover many different aspects and can bring things together. So not just looking at a specific angle like climate or energy, but see how it is connected to these other aspects of development. Now, you'll be pleased to know that going forward, energy in particular has become one of the specific declared priorities for my organization in our new strategic plan that has been put in place by our administrator, Achim Steiner, since he came on board last year. So within that, we will be particularly focusing on energy access. So we'll continue to do all the things, including working with industry, and the whole interface with very technical issues of refrigerants and replacement programs and how it links to energy efficiency. We do that, and we'll continue to do that. But we will have an increasing focus on energy access. Within that, we like very much the framework that Sustainable Energy for All has come up with, a more focused approach. Your sort of 80-20 principle. High-impact countries where you focus your attention, which I also see in this report, again, applied in a different way. We're already working in all of these countries mentioned, and so we have at least a start there. Again, with the framework of the different categories of populations mentioned in the report, the rural poor and the slum dwellers, I think, will be of particular attention, a particular focus for us going forward. So we are not particularly surprised by these numbers. 1 billion people, there's a lot of people. It's a challenge. But, you know, there are even bigger numbers out there for some other aspects of energy, like clean cooking, where we're dealing with 3 billion people that still have no access to that. So I don't think we should feel intimidated by this. It should rather be an additional reason to give it our full attention, and we will definitely do so. So I think with these few words, I mean, maybe one final point that I thought was very interesting. As I said at the beginning, we have been doing a lot of this, not necessarily through the lens of cooling. And for me, like others. And so although I think I know a little bit more than the average person about the topic, there was a couple of new things in the report that I thought were very welcome. And one of them is this idea of thinking more holistically and terminally. So do not automatically all the time only think about cooling as following the typical way through electricity run devices like air conditioning. Of course, there will be there and will continue to be there, but there's other things you can do. And I thought that was particularly interesting, and I definitely learned from that. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you very much, Marcel. So I think we're building up a picture of you know, all the partners in this enterprise of the Sustainable Development Goals and these international agreements. There's room for everybody, and it's really the way in which we build the partnerships that will help us sort of build speed and scale that's important. I'm going to flip over the moderation to my colleague Dan Hamza in a moment, but just before I do, I'd like to give the floor to His Excellency Jose Augusto, who's the National Secretary of Planning Development from Ecuador. Ecuador is important for many different reasons, but some very important ones in the next year. Not only are we absolutely delighted that we will have Her Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ecuador, as the President of the General Assembly, but Ecuador will host the meeting of the parties of the Montreal Protocol in November and has a leading role to play in spurring action in that regard. The floor is yours, sir, for a brief comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished participants, it is my pleasure to participate in this interesting event for the launch of this report, which is a timely opportunity to renew our commitment towards the protection of our planet, Mother Earth, from environmental degradation and the increase of its average temperature. According to the World Meteorological Organization, 2015, 16, and 17 have been confirmed as the 3 warmest years of records, and 2017 was the warmest year without an El Niño event. Consistent with its long-standing national policy to support environmental sound decisions, Ecuador ratified the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol of substances that deplete the ozone layer, and January this year, reinforcing our commitment to principle of Vienna Convention. In this regard, I have the honor to transmit the invitation by Mr. Lenín Moreno, President of Ecuador, to participate in the third meeting of the party to the Montreal Protocol to be held in Quito, Ecuador, from 5 to 9 November 2018. As during the third Habitat Conference in Quito during 2016, it will be a pleasure for our country and our people to host this important event. We believe all interest parties, national and local government representatives of industry, civil society, and academia should recommend ourselves toward initiatives to keep developing affordable and sustainable cooling solutions, in particular for developing countries and the most vulnerable people. Consider also that for developing countries such as Ecuador, the support of the Multilateral Fund and other cooperation entities become crucial to keeping up the political momentum towards this common endeavor. Thank you.
I'll move. Yeah, you just sit here. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I think the whole panel needs to swap out. Musical chairs. Okay. Let's not lose any time. We have a fairly hard stop at 12:30, maybe a couple of minutes extra. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be here, but even more than that, it's just hugely exciting. Why do I say that? I say that because in the work that we're all collectively engaged in, we need to make what we do more real for everybody who's not in this room and everybody who generally isn't tapped into the work that we do and the conversations that we have. And that needs to change because we need to connect better with people in order to realize the change that we're all striving to achieve. And I think cooling is an example where we can make it real for people. Cooling is a core need for all, but as has been mentioned this morning, it's often overlooked. I think it's been particularly overlooked by the international community. We have some interesting data on that Humin will share. And most recently, the IEA even referred to cooling as a blind spot in the climate and energy debates. So I think the launch of Chilling Prospects, which I very much welcome, and well done to the team, can help to open our eyes. It can help to address the issue of cooling being a blind spot for our community and for others. And we have an amazing opportunity now to work on an issue that's in service of the Sustainable Development Goals, but one that's also very practical, it's very human, it's very real, and that is exciting. It's also very exciting that at the end of 2016, all parties came together to agree an amendment to the Montreal Protocol. This focuses not only on phasing out and down super polluting F gases, but also opens the door to additional work on energy efficiency. And I should say, once again, congratulations to Rwanda for fantastic work in hosting the conference and bringing that negotiation to a successful conclusion. This is a huge climate prize. That, plus the very real needs from cooling, helped to motivate the climate philanthropy community to come together in really quite an historical way, as Charlotte referred to earlier, 17 philanthropic foundations and individuals pledging over $50 million. This is a special moment. It's a special moment for us in our community, and ClimateWorks is very honored to be playing its part in helping realize the progress that's needed. So, 3 points from me before I hand over to the panel. The first is quite simply to say a massive thank you to Rachel and the team. I know that they're probably bearing a few scars from this report process, so I hope those heal quickly. Well done, a lot of work's gone in. We now have a baseline. We didn't have a baseline before. We didn't really understand access to cooling. We have that. We have a conceptual framework, and we have some recommendations for action. And this report will certainly ground the philanthropic response that Charlotte's just referred to, but it would also create a platform to engage with the wider community, because we absolutely cannot do this alone. Second point, we decided to focus on access to cooling as we agreed there was an apparent problem. And this report has put some strong numbers on the table. And we thought that either the problem wouldn't be solved using existing ways of thinking, or if it was, then that would create an environmental disaster. Think Einstein's quote of not being able to solve problems with the same mindset that created them. So that really very much inspired us to try and open our minds, reflecting on cooling debates very much being dominated by conversations about refrigerant choice, and progress having been more or less about incremental efficiency. Meanwhile, more than 1 billion people around the world don't have access to cooling. These seem like parallel universes. And instead, we thought that what was needed was a new cooling paradigm, one in which cooling services and thermal systems and big technology come together with plants and ice and paint and other approaches which are incredibly accessible and appropriate and affordable for all. My third and final point is, as I was asked, I have to say something about what we're going to do in terms of action. So you'll hear some announcements from the panel, and I don't want to steal their thunder, but I have to say the following, that with the funds that we have a bias for action. Talking and research is important, but we really want to get practical and to get the support to those that need it. We have a bias for finding partnerships with institutions that have longevity that can make our initial support more sustainable. We will certainly be focusing our support on the countries which the Chilling Prospects report highlights as those most in need. And we will certainly be focusing on the 3 key areas that the report highlights, those being people, in buildings, food, and the medical cold chain. Very pleased as well that we will be providing some of our support to Rachel and the team to carry out the secretariat function that was referred to in the report. We'll have a few other announcements today, and please watch this space. Over the next couple of months, there will be more great news of action coming up. Critical to all of this and to the success of the programme, we think, will be the ability to frame our work in ways which resonate with the wider world. We need to meet people where they are in order to make what we're doing more real. So for example, the conversation on health really needs to be framed in terms of how health can benefit from efficient, clean cooling, not what can health do for energy efficiency. So yeah, it's very much about the framing. Of course, for us, carbon pollution is still absolutely core. It was the front foot for the majority of the interventions that we're supporting through the rest of the programme. But within our work on access to cooling, our desire is really to be in service of the SDGs with the aim of helping speed up much needed progress. So that's my introductory few words. Let's get to the panel. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to introduce the 5 panelists today. On my right, Sarah Butler-Sloss, the founder director of Ashton. Kurt's down there to my left. Kurt Schickman, the executive director of the Global Cool Cities Alliance. My colleague, Hu Min, to my left, who is our head of the Access to Cooling program and also our China advisor. To my right, at the end, Natasha Bilimoria, who is the director for US strategy for Gavi. And back to my left, it's like a little dance I've got to do here, is Sneha Sachar, the senior program lead for the Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy in India. So welcome to the panelists. And without further ado, we will go straight to Sarah. So first up, Sarah, Ashton has been an absolute trailblazer in finding solutions for sustainable energy, including in developing countries, but not only. Lots of great work across economies around the world. Would love to hear just a little bit about how cooling has featured in some of your work to date. I think you have a little announcement to make. And also, how do you see prizes being a critical solution to help ensure cooling for all? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dan. Well, it's a huge privilege to be here, and thank you to the Kigali Cooling Energy Programme and SEforALL for making this happen, and Climate Works. It is a really important issue for the health of our planet and for the health of people in it. It's amazing the impact that without cooling, the detrimental impact without cooling has. Just to say a few words to you about what Ashton is, it's a UK charity which rewards best practice in the clean energy space. We are very focused internationally on increasing energy access and bringing energy to those that have none. So the organizations that we reward are the entrepreneurs, finance organizations, public-private partnerships that are the innovators in the space of bringing sustainable energy to everyone. In our many years of running, we have come up, cooling is clearly a very important issue. We do focus on off-grid, generally speaking, but we also have sustainable buildings that are not always off-grid. But within the off-grid sector, we've never had a cooling award, but we are about to announce one happening very soon. But let me just tell you before we make that announcement that up until now, we've never had a specific cooling award, but what we do is this year, for example, we had an Energy and Productive Uses Award, and Powering Business Award. In that award, we rewarded an amazing organization that provides portable solar cold rooms for farmers in India. It's called EcoZen, and I believe one of the founders is in this room. Welcome, Vivek. And what this organization does is help smallholder farmers and medium-sized farmers to protect their produce and gives them that ability to cool it, which allows the farmers to increase their incomes. It prevents the huge amount of food waste that we've talked about. In somewhere like India, 20% of vegetables and fruit are destroyed every year from food waste. So this is addressing that problem, but it is also enabling smallholder farmers and the medium-sized farmers to be able to avoid that wastage. It's very much the first mile rather than the last mile, so it's straight from harvest into these cool rooms, and it's a combination of high-tech as well as low-tech that is making this possible. They have refrigeration that has no need for a battery. It has a very clever kind of cooling mechanism through the use of ice and water. And it can deal with low levels of sunlight as well as high levels. And it can go for almost 30 hours without needing any power. So it's a really exciting new technology that is accessible to those farmers and has a huge potential to grow and make a difference to farmers. We also this year had a very interesting runner-up in our Energy and Health Award, which was looking at refrigeration, solar refrigeration for vaccines. Again, it didn't need any batteries, and it's able to protect those vaccines throughout the day. It only needs 4 hours of electricity because of the energy efficiency that it has. So we're beginning to see really exciting innovations in this space that are both affordable and practical in those off-grid solutions that are dealing with the health problems as well as the food security problems. We've also seen through our Sustainable Buildings Awards, we've seen some really, really exciting things happening on how to cool people. We've seen it in a very unexpected area of Infosys, which is one, as you're all aware, one of the largest Indian IT businesses. But what they have led on is reducing the energy consumption of their campuses, and they have huge campuses, almost like mini towns that house, and they don't live there, but they have all their offices and their restaurants and shops on site, holding about 20,000 people. On those campuses, they have 11 across India. They've reduced their energy consumption by over 40%, largely by adding cooling mechanisms, both high-tech and low-tech, from painting their roofs white through to halving the size of their chilling plants because they were too big. There's an enormous amount you can do in the built environment in terms of the passive side of things, whether it's through the orientation of the building, the size of the windows, the shading to the windows. All of those have a profound effect on cooling. Just painting the roofs white reduces the solar gain by 50%. There are some very good low-tech solutions and low-cost solutions. There's also some very high-tech solutions that Infosys has done, which is having very sophisticated building management systems that can monitor and adjust where there's kind of energy insanities, where you're heating and cooling the same rooms, but you find the solution and you deal with that. We've also seen a very interesting, in our Sustainable Buildings Award, financial mechanism where low-interest construction loans to developers to build energy-efficient, low-cost buildings and housing for people in Mexico has had a profound effect on the industry. So through funding from a housing developer banking organization in Mexico, SHF, combining with IDB and KfW to provide finance, they are creating these energy-efficient homes, which are reducing the energy consumption of those homes by 20 to 30%. And again, it comes down to cooling. Cooling has a huge impact on the energy efficiency of places like Mexico or anywhere in the global south, which suffers from these high temperatures. So there is a lot of interesting high-tech and low-tech solutions that we are seeing, both from providing that refrigeration that's needed for smallholder farmers and the vaccines to the housing situation and the built environment. And it's very exciting. It's very exciting to see your report, and it absolutely chimes with what we're doing. What I'm delighted to say is that thanks to the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Programme and SEforALL and Climate Works, we are going to be running a Cooling for People Award next year, which is really exciting, where we will be going out there and finding what innovations are happening on the ground. What we believe awards can bring is, one, it brings huge kudos to those organizations that win. It raises the profile of the problems, but also the solutions to tackle those problems. It propels the winners that win to help them expand. And at Ashton, we reward them, but we also support our winners. So we introduce them to finance, and we help them with building, with business support. So there is a huge positive about having awards. But the other side is the insights that we get from the ground. By putting our ear to the ground, by throwing out the call for entries to find those people that are innovating, we find amazing solutions. And we use those solutions not like we're not a think tank, but we're like a best practice tank. And we want to get those solutions that are happening and might not be well known to really expand and scale up.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. Great examples, and we look forward to next year to seeing where we get to with the award. Okay, I just had a note saying we can go over a bit longer till 12:45, but still, panelists, please, let's try and stick to the timing. So next up is Kurt. Kurt, air conditioning has absolutely dominated the way in which we cool buildings around the world. It's delivered huge benefits, but many people around the world, more than a billion, don't have access to energy, so they're not about to buy an air conditioner soon, even though the global market is set to explode. So as the world urbanizes, as the planet warms up, what can we actually do, particularly in urban areas, to ensure that we can keep people who are in buildings cool and comfortable?
Sure. Well, thanks, first of all, for having me here today and for allowing me to be part of the cooling panel over the last year or so. For those of you who don't know what the Global Cool Cities Alliance is, we're a nonprofit NGO organization that works with communities, cities, and national governments to help them understand their issues around excess heat and connect with each other and to the expert community to help them solve their specific challenges. There are common challenges with heat, but each city addresses them in a different way. They have different things that go into that, so we help them sort of address their specific issue. One of the best things about this report from my very biased perspective is the focus that the team has put on cool roofs as a solution at this stage. And the reason I like that is not just because I work on it, although that's a lot of it. It's because it's simple in the sense that it's an ancient technology. This is not a new concept. There are modern products that go into it, but there can also be traditional building styles that accomplish these very similar things. So in the sort of spirit of meeting people where they are, this is a simple technology that allows us to do that. We've talked a lot about the huge $1.1 billion people that are in the most immediate danger. And this is a solution that can be deployed immediately. We have the technologies now. Some are local, some are part of the global trade process, but they're there now. And the other important thing about this is it really is a strategy that goes across the different parts of this problem that we're talking about. On the part of the world that's going to be dealing with mechanical AC, this will help them reduce that energy savings or energy demand by about 30 or up to 20% or so, in some cases up to 30%. But for that huge group of folks that will never have access to a mechanical cooling or very likely won't have it, in urban areas and rural areas and in informal circumstances, there's a huge indoor and ambient air temperature opportunity here if we do this at scale and do it right. Some of our analysis, or at least some work we've done in India, shows that we can get about a 3 to 3.5 degrees Celsius reduction inside the building of an informal dwelling. That's a brick building with a corrugated metal roof. And that's during the hot part of the day. So that's the difference between life and death on a very hot day for a lot of people. And it allows people to use their homes during the day, which currently in many contexts, that's, they're sleeping outdoors and there's challenges related to that as well. If we get to scale again, the report mentions, I think, the 4 degrees Celsius opportunity to cool our space. That's average temperature. There are some neighborhoods now currently where we don't have good data on how hot they are, but what we know from some small tests are, if your weather station is pretty far away from the informal settlements that are most at risk. And in those contexts, they're typically 3, 5, 7 degrees hotter than where we're measuring. So this really helps, I think, to address this need that we are still trying to understand in a more meaningful way. And if we do that, there's a whole broad set of benefits that we get from that. There's obviously the energy benefits, there's health. Heat is obviously something that exacerbates all manner of heart and lung, diabetes, other types of diseases that get hidden in a lot of the numbers we see in terms of heat deaths. We often don't understand that these are part of the heat death equation. There's air quality benefits, resiliency to our grids, either on-grid or off-grid, where we have peak demand coming through, even on a micro scale. This can help minimize that challenge. But one thing I'd like to point out that I've heard a little bit today, but was something that really resonated with us. We did a pilot project in Kais, which is in South Africa. This is in the Northern Cape, so it's a very hot, high solar radiation area. And we went in and we had a very innovative, very hard-driving local municipal manager of this town. It's about 15,000 people, named Teresa Skeepers. And so we went in and we showed her what the technology was, and she said, well, can we install this? And I said, well, yeah, absolutely, we can work with you to do that. So instead of this being a pilot project that was delivered from outside, it was a project that we trained folks on how to actually install this, how to mix the product. So actually you're creating these little bits of supply chain locally. And so what ended up selling this project, and it's now gone from a one dwelling pilot project to 500 houses, is the fact that it created jobs for local youth in particular, but also unemployed folks that were having to leave the community for long periods of time to find work. And this actually created a greater opportunity for them to stay in their local community with their families together. So completely far afield from the types of things we're talking about here, but really drove the decision process there, and is now actually, in reverse from the top-down approach, really driven national level attention and attention at the bigger cities of South Africa on how to do this right. So I'm very excited about the opportunities that lay out there for for Sustainable Energy for All, for KSEP to be working in this space, because I think it's a space that, while it sounds simple, we haven't done enough to accelerate the opportunities that are out there. So I look forward to working with you guys on that.
Great, thanks, Kurt. Good case studies, and I think statistics there about the role that cool roofs can play, and a reminder not to throw ancient wisdom out, but to remember how to use it and then combine it with modern approaches. I even read recently that some of the reflexive paints can absorb particulate matter and help solve air quality problems at the same time. So thank you, Kurt. Next up, hand to my colleague Hu Min, who is going to say a little bit about what the capacity gap is in terms of cooling for all and what we are planning. Hu Min.
Thank you, Dan. As Dan mentioned, KeySep focus on solutions, actions, and we cannot do it alone. So one of our goals is we want to mobilize resources, partnership, and leadership toward efficient, clean, and affordable cooling. To do that, we see the urgent need to mainstream cooling into development priorities and actions. KeySep has supported a study screening the ODA projects and funding. We discovered that there are only 0.1 ODA projects, and funding going to cooling, which is 1% of education and health. But we're not simply argue or advocate for more funding to cooling simply. We want call for action is to really consider cooling as an important component when designing development programs. For example, if you are supporting hospitals in Bangladesh, make sure cooling is efficient and affordable and sufficient, of course. For hospital, that's very important. And if we're rural development projects that many panelists have mentioned in Africa, for example, consider provide cooling service as a means to help the farmers to improve their economic output and productivity. And of course, the climate change adaptation plans needs to really consider actions tackling heat stress to save lives. So what we need is not really a huge amount of extra funding, but we do need to have this systematic thinking and see cooling something reinforcing all the other sustainable development goals. And that's how we put cooling at the core of SDGs. So in order to make that happen, we need to change the mindset of the society, especially policymakers. We see there's a knowledge gap to see cooling from a thermal perspective, service perspective, and of course development perspective, in addition to an energy perspective and technology perspective. KeySep will work with IEA and SEforALL to design training programs that help policymakers to understand this gap. And the training will bring officials from not only energy sectors, but also other areas so that they can meet and find the synergy. And we want to see more policymakers. They will, when we ask questions about the cooling, they will say, oh, I do know cooling very well. Not like we don't know it very well. So we're very happy to launch this work of our access to cooling with our partners. We look forward to working with all of you and by more solid partnership in future. Thank you.
Thank you, Min. And for those representatives from developing countries, please look out. The training should be made available to your countries. Please get in contact with the SEforALL Secretariat or ourselves if you don't get invitations coming your way. Okay, next up is Natasha. Welcome, Natasha. Gavi, of course, recognizes the need for better cooling and has spent a lot of time and money on cooling technology. It'd be interesting to hear from you. What have you done so far? What do you think needs to change, and what are you currently exploring?
Sure.
Welcome.
So thank you for having me, and I just want to thank Sustainable Energy for All and KSEF for this really terrific report. I personally am grateful to be on this panel because, quite frankly, we don't get the opportunity to speak in front of an audience like this very often, and I think this report, and actually many of the people who already have spoken, have really talked about the impact of climate change and the need for cooling and how that impacts immunization around the world. So it's really in all of our combined interest to figure out how to mitigate these issues and move forward for all the safety and security reasons that were already raised in some of the with the other speakers. So for those of you that don't know Gavi, just quickly, we're a public-private partnership with the mission of saving lives and really protecting people's health through equitable use of immunization and vaccines in lower income countries. It's been said a number of times already, but the issue of cooling really is vital to deliver this potent and life-saving intervention. But I think it's also important to realize that it's the same people that this report talks about that are going to be impacted by the lack of cooling. These are exactly the same people who are also already bearing a huge burden of health issues, high disease prevalence like malaria and cholera, and lacking access to health systems, and really those who are most susceptible to disease outbreaks that we're seeing more and more of these days. And so, I think it's important to make that connection. I also think it's important that we understand that some of the technologies that are required to deliver vaccines, are also not running as efficiently as they should be. They can often run on gas and kerosene and other non-efficient fuels. So it's really important that we look at both sides of this question. So it's been talked about how, cooling is critical because vaccines and a lot of other pharmaceutical products, they lose their effectiveness if they become too warm, but also if they become too cold. Freezing is also an issue that we have to monitor. And so it's important that the cold chain technologies and other health technologies that are required to keep these vaccines at the right temperature are available, and we really need to make sure that we're doing all we can to ensure that we are able to distribute and ensure that all of those who need vaccines require them, regardless of where they live, is possible. One of the issues also that we're facing around the cooling issue is the lack of precise data. So there's data as it relates to who actually requires the vaccine. So, we immunize over 60 million children every year, but there's still 15 million kids that are under-immunized, and 1.5 million still die of vaccine-preventable diseases each year. And these under-immunized populations are often concentrated in slums, but also are the rural poor. So again, the same populations that are disproportionately impacted by the cooling, the lack of cooling. And so in order to be able to get to this fully immunized child or 100% coverage, we actually require better data on, which children are missing out. We've reached a peak at about 80% of coverage level. So we're really looking as an organization to figure out how can we expand our engagement in innovative ways to deliver vaccines to the hardest to reach children and achieve our goal of immunizing 300 million children by 2020. And so, there's the larger data issue, but then there's also the data issue around supply chain itself. We need to understand throughout the cold chain, supply chain process, where are the difficulties that we're seeing around either too warm or too cool. And so we really have to close the data gap to ensure that we can see what's happening to reach those, to basically reach the unreached. And then just very quickly, we are working also to tackle some of these issues. It's not all doom and gloom. I think one thing that's really important to know is that, the number of children dying before the age of 5 has decreased dramatically. We're at 5.6 million, whereas in 2016, whereas we're almost 10 million kids dying in 2000. So we've immunized over 700 million kids, and so again, there are good things that are happening. But in order to overcome some of these issues, we are really working to find new technologies. We have a new cold chain optimization, it's not new actually, actually. In 2017, we launched a cold chain optimization platform to really boost innovation, to figure out how do we maintain a sustainable supply chain in the cold chain with different types of equipment. We also have an innovative platform called Infuse, which is innovation for this the uptake, scale up, and equity of immunization. And through that program, we're also looking, working with companies that have new technologies that can help really help us understand the temperature issues that are happening and therefore find solutions in innovative and cost-effective sort of ways. And we are also exploring how we can work with KSEP, again, on these issues. And so, I think from my perspective, it's clear that there's no single actor that can solve these problems, and it's really through collaboration and innovation that we can really systematically and sustainably reach those who are in need with life-saving vaccines.
Thank you, Natasha, particularly for sharing some good news about saving lives. And we look forward to exploring what technologies can help to do more of that. So last but by no means least, Sneha, you get the final word. So the report highlights the need to take a systems approach to more efficient clean cooling. It's quite hard intellectually often to argue against that, but in reality, it can be quite hard to deliver. So it would be very interesting to hear what is most practical, particularly from the perspective of a developing country like India. What has been done to help support more systems-based approaches and what more needs doing? A huge question can be answered in no more than 5 minutes.
I will speak really quickly. First of all, really happy to be here and see that there are so many minds focused on a problem that's, that impacts all of us globally. So very happy to be here. Very, very quick introduction for my organization, Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy. We are based out of New Delhi in India. And we are a not-for-profit think tank focusing on policy advocacy and market enablement for positioning energy efficiency as the first fuel and really working at the nexus of energy efficiency and climate change. I see a lot of organizations here that we've collaborated with and enjoyed working with. Back to your question, Dan. So, answering it from India's perspective, really India's cooling demand and the issue of India's escalating cooling demand is very unique in some ways. Right now, we are a country that are at about a 5% penetration of air conditioners. So we aligned so well with the SEforALL report in sort of the notion that cooling is not a luxury, it is really a social imperative. And congratulations to the team that put the report together to really, reinforcing that point home. So, the point I was going to make was that we really have a very low air conditioning penetration. Even with very aggressive future growth projections in the next 10 years, perhaps about a third of the country is going to have air conditioners. So there will be a significant portion of the population that is not going to have mechanical means for cooling and thermal comfort. And there will also continue to be a significant portion of the population that will not have access to reliable electricity. The other aspect about India's cooling challenge is that the majority of our cooling demand is yet to come. It's latent demand. So a lot of the building stock is yet to come, and there's going to be a lot of new adapters to air conditioning. So with that, given the magnitude of India's cooling challenge and sort of the diverse nature of the challenges across the social spectrum, a systems approach becomes really, really important because really that'll lead us to a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. Some of the cool things that are happening in India right now on the cooling front, and I will not be able to cover all of them in 5 minutes, I know, but I'll try and hit upon the more important ones. One is, Rachel already mentioned, the National Cooling Action Plan that the government of India is working on. We are a very active participant working with the government on developing that. And the Cooling Action Plan is going to take a 20-year outlook into the future of India's cooling. And it is really aiming to be a holistic approach to sustainably meeting India's cooling needs in all consumption sectors: space cooling, cold chain, refrigeration, mobile air conditioning, industrial process cooling, and by all means, also keeping an equal focus on reducing and optimizing the cooling loads. Not just this is how much we're going to grow and how do we meet this, but also this is how much we would grow under business as usual, but then how can we optimize this growth so that we are better prepared and have less grid impacts and societal impacts and health impacts and environmental impacts. So that's the National Cooling Action Plan. And speaking of holistic, I think the very first thing that needs to happen is no pressure. Building energy efficiency really promises to be a huge part of the solution, at least as far as the developing countries is concerned. And some of the things that India is doing is we already have an energy conservation building code for commercial buildings. This year we are coming out with residential with a focus primarily on thermal comfort. Adaptive thermal comfort is another aspect which doesn't get talked about a lot when we have these kinds of conversations about cooling, but that is really gaining momentum in India. As a country with a high ambient temperature, adaptive thermal comfort holds a lot of promise. We are right in the middle of lab testing and field testing right now to really understand the nationwide saving impacts that a 1 or 2 degrees Celsius temperature difference can make, and those are pretty substantial impacts. The other thing I want to quickly talk about is we talked about competitions earlier. We are actually working with Rocky Mountain Institute on a global cooling prize competition, which will be launched in India in November this year. And this is supported by the Government of India's Department of Science and Technology under the Mission Innovations Initiative. And this competition really challenges status quo and strives to be something that will drive scalable, cutting-edge innovation in cooling technology that is at least 5 times more energy efficient than the current best, and has low global warming potential, and does not use any rare earth minerals, and it has all of those details around it. But the idea is, how can we really leapfrog instead of going incremental improvements? We talked a little bit about cold chain in this room. So one of the things that India is doing is the government has announced an initiative and also set aside budget this year called the Doubling Farmers' Income by 2022. So in the next 5 or so years, we are really looking to allocate funds. The government has allocated funds to plug in the critical market linkages so that our cold chain can be more integrated and create those connections. So I think I will stop there. I mean, there's a lot going on, but I feel...
Feel the creeping pressure.
Just a little bit, but happy to chat afterwards if anybody has specific questions. Thanks for having us here.
Yeah, and they and I can be really quick. So all I'll say is wealth of knowledge and experience on the panel, far too much to keep within the time that we had. Please come and talk to any or all of them afterwards. Thank you. Really, really great sharing of your work. Keep up the good work. Rachel, back to you.
Thank you. So I want to say one thing to member states in the room, which is this report is the sort of end of the beginning, right? So now there is already an extraordinary amount of innovation and work already going on in the health sector, in the food and beverage sector, in agriculture, in technology, in refrigeration, in energy efficiency, whatever. And the tendency is, when we look at it from the top down, that we look at these silos, look at SDG 7, 3, 5, whatever. If you look at it from the bottom up and you think about what does it take for us to make sure that people are comfortable, people are able to be productive within the economy, people are able to be safe, their medicines are safe, their food's safe, their children are safe, then you start to see this extraordinary agenda that you shepherded through and agreed in 2015 in real terms. And what we've got to do is, not have a massive amount of new pledging for cooling, but to take the resources which are already there and make sure that they are being deployed in such a way that we can unleash unleash the innovative capacity of the private sector, that we can allow some of these partnerships to really move forward. We can use prizes to inspire. We can find out how to scale up the things that we're already giving prizes to. And so I see that there's a sort of underbelly of cooling, which is really important. And it's important for those of you who are working on off-grid electricity and those of you who are working on grid smartness and things like this. You know, if we understand the thermal economy, perhaps we have a chance at bending those curves in the right direction. So